early 1970s to support people in accessing benefits. The local branches were very active in this work. Publications, first short leaflets and later very substantial welfare rights guides were produced, and the office also ran innovative welfare rights courses for social workers and others. This is now a very substantial part of CPAG's work, with a wide range of publications, guides and online services, and a very full programme of training courses. The CPAG team also provides specialist legal support with tribunal appeals, judicial reviews, and legal text cases. Finally, it is these two areas that form the backbone of the third area, the central core of CPAG activity, the campaigning work. The rigour of the research evidence and the knowledge of how the system works in practice has enabled CPAG to effectively engage with, challenge and persuade governments in Westminster and since 1999 in Scotland of the case to tackle child poverty. And to do this, not just with data and evidence, but also with passion and commitment. There are many issues and campaign highlights over the years, too many to detail here, with many ups and downs. I will mention just two areas. First, child benefit, a common thread across the years. CPAG played a major role in ensuring that child benefit was implemented from 1977 and has continued to defend and to argue for the importance of child benefit, making the moral, the social and the economic cost for society to support all children. Second, and very much in our minds at the moment, the development and implementation of a national child poverty strategy due to be published soon. CPAG has vigorously presented very clear messages about what should be included, about the need for clear targets and milestones, and about regular reporting. We don't forget that we've been here before in the early 2000s with the strategy then driven in large part by the commitment and leadership of Gordon Brown. It is therefore a real pleasure that Gordon is with us here today as our keynote speaker. We thank you very much for that. Remember, Sarah already said this, but important to remember, that strategy was successful. We know it can be done, and we can do it again. None of these achievements would have been possible without the work of dedicated and knowledgeable staff. The current team, led by Alison, and all the previous directors and their teams. We owe a big thanks to them and to all the many people who have served as trustees over the years, generously giving their time and expertise. And also thanks to our many members and supporters. This celebration is about all of you in this room. The banner on the CPAG website states, quote, "We are the trusted voice on child poverty." I think that sums it up very nicely. Over 60 years, CPAG has built a reputation for rigorous, clear, well-founded evidence and testimony on child poverty. Governments need vision, sometimes courage, to do the right thing. CPAG has helped to provide that. Whatever the future holds, I'm sure that CPAG will be there to review, to comment, to monitor, to evaluate, to persuade, and to convince, tirelessly pursuing the aim to end child poverty in the UK. Thank you.
Sarah, Jane, thank you both very much indeed. I'll be very, very brief. I just want to say it is a huge pleasure and a privilege to be here. I'm not really here. This will annoy my colleagues from the BBC when I say it, but I'm not really here as a BBC journalist. I'm here because for 25 years I've been completely obsessed with this subject and noticed that in recent years child poverty has gotten a lot worse. And I've spent decades now working with kids from incredibly tough backgrounds and watching the horror with which they approach their daily life is, I think, the great moral stain in our country. And for those of you in this room who looked at this document, which I'm proud to say the BBC spent a lot of time looking at last week, called the indices or indexes of multiple deprivation, it was an absolutely haunting piece of work that showed that for certain communities in this country, poverty is extremely serious and getting worse and has been bad for a very long time. So that's why I'm here. I'm intellectually interested in it, and I think that we need to elevate it on the media agenda. It is therefore a massive pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Gordon Brown. Mr. Brown, can I call you Gordon? I'm going to call you Gordon. I think it's weird. I mean, you're literally sat there. It's just sort of, it's not. You're Mr. Brown on the Today programme, but so actually I am here from the BBC. Sorry. Gordon was Chancellor of the Exchequer, as you all know, from 1997 to 2007, he then served as Prime Minister until 2010. I spent the waking hours this morning checking that what I'm about to say is true, and it is. In his capacity as both Chancellor and Prime Minister, he did preside over a historic reduction in child poverty, and he did introduce the groundbreaking Child Poverty Act. That said, child poverty in the UK today is at a record high. 4.5 million children live in poverty. And on the occasion of CPAG's 60th anniversary, I think Gordon is the ideal person to tell us how we reduced child poverty in the past, and now in a very different and perhaps harder context, we can perhaps do it again. Gordon, thank you.
Can I say, first of all, what a real pleasure it is to be with you today. I want, first of all, to thank Amol Rajan. I know why he moved from Today programme to also doing University Challenge. He's been crying out for people to answer his questions.
And they do it better than most politicians, I'll say that.
Amol's interest in child poverty is long-standing, and I do appreciate you taking
Pleasure.
the time to come with us today. And I'm also really pleased to see so many people who are involved in anti-poverty work, in charities, in foundations, in groups throughout the country. And I want to thank you for the work you do, the service you give, and indeed the difference that you make. And it's a real pleasure that I will be followed by Alison McGovern, whom I've worked with for 15 years, and she is a genuine champion of action against child poverty. Once the Minister in the Department of Work and Pensions, now combating homelessness as the Minister for Local Government. And I'm very pleased also that we've got Angela Rayner here, because she has also done so much work to highlight the issue of child poverty. We have Meg Hillier here, who's the chairman of the Select Committee, who interrogated the gambling industry and forced an admission that they thought the gambling industry did no social harm. And I hope that the country will understand that there is something that's got to be done to deal with social harm caused by the gambling industry. And we've got Jonathan Ashworth, who used to be the spokesman on child poverty and who's now, probably like Amal, a television commentator over many hours. But seriously, the reason I'm here is to commemorate and also congratulate Child Poverty Action Group on its years of achievement. You know what we say in Britain, given our long history, that the first 500 years of any institution is always the most difficult. Child Poverty Action Group has achieved more in 60 years than many institutions will achieve in 1,000 years. You have championed advocacy against poverty. You were the first to do a welfare rights handbook to advise people how to claim their rights in poverty. Child Poverty Action Group was instrumental in the creation, as we've just heard, of Child Benefit, which might not have been created other than for the actions of Child Poverty Group in the 1970s. I want to thank Ruth Lister, who's your president, all who have already spoken from the Child Poverty Action Group, and of course, Alison, your director. And I think we celebrate 15 years of you being director, and thank you, Alison, for everything that you've done over 15 years. We want to thank you. And we must remember one other thing, if I may say so, that the Child Poverty Action Group has got to raise money to do its work, and it has to raise £5 million a year, something I hadn't quite realised is something that we must help them to do so. Child Poverty Action raises its money by information and advice and by the charm to your donors. I used to have another way of raising money, and it was called taxation. Some of you know that when I was doing the finance job, my house was burgled and vandalised, and the police came round and said, is there anybody who might have a motive? Is there anybody who's got a grievance? And I said, well, you know, any one of 30 million taxpayers. So when you know now that there are 1 million children who are trying to sleep tonight without a bed of their own, when you know that there are 2 million children in this country who are in a home that either doesn't have a washing machine or a fridge or a cooker to get hot and fresh food, or doesn't have the toiletries like soap and shampoo and toothpaste that make for a decent life, when we know from a survey that there are 3 million children that are having to skip meals because there's not enough food in the house, and when we have this shocking figure that there are now 4.5 million children in poverty, the highest figure for 60 years, higher than even under the Thatcher major years, then it's got to be said that if a child poverty action group did not exist, it would have to be created today to deal with these injustices and inequalities in our society that have got to be addressed. Children going to school ill-clad and hungry, I see it in my own former constituency where I live. Families having to choose between heating, eating and keeping clean. Mothers after a back-breaking work, and I've seen it, having to queue up at food banks to get food just to make ends meet for the children. And children, as the Children's Commissioner reported in the summer, tragically feeling ostracized, isolated, humiliated, shunned at school, and ashamed that they're part of a family that is suffering poverty. Homes without heating, bedrooms without beds, kitchens without kitchen utensils, floors without floor covering, toilets without even toilet rolls. This is the state of life for many, many millions of children in Britain today, and we've got to address this in a way that has got to happen with the Child Poverty Review. Now, I'm delighted that the government set up a Child Poverty Review immediately it came into power. I'm delighted also it's had a consultation period, and I've been one of those people who've been submitting a consultation to it. I'm also hoping that it will report at the time of the budget with recommendations for the future. And my point is this. We will need a national alliance of foundations, charities, businesses, local, national and devolved governments over these next few years to keep the flame of hope alive that poverty can be addressed in this country and indeed poverty can be eradicated in this country. And I know that the government wants to see living standards rise, and the one group of people who have suffered the biggest cut in living standards is the poorest families in our country, partly because of the two-child rule. I know the government wants to have a budget that is about fairness, and there is no group that deserves fairer treatment than those people who have suffered over these last 15 years. And I know that the government's budget is about the long-term future, and we know that the best investment in the long-term future of this country is to invest in those third of the children, almost half our future, who have been denied the ability to succeed at school at the moment because they're ill-equipped to go to school because of poverty in their family. If you think of the condition of Britain, there was a condition of Britain question at the beginning of the 19th century as a result of industrialization. And it took people like Dickens to expose the poverty, himself having grown up in poverty, to expose the poverty in the country. And it led a conservative Prime Minister Disraeli to talk about two nations that did not recognize the existence of each other, the rich and the poor. And it led on to even Churchill in the 1906 Liberal government saying that there was a gap between the accumulated excesses of wealth and the gaping sorrows of the left-out millions, and that led to a decade of social reform. And then in the 1930s, there was another condition of Britain question because of mass unemployment. And it led to the welfare state, and it was charted, of course, by Orwell in The Road to Wigan Pier. And it led to the welfare state, it led to the health service being free at the point of need, it led to the creation of family allowances in the 1940s, and it led to this idea of social security, which was then a good word, social security, that would take, as Bevan said, to take the shame out of need, something that is not true in the way that some politicians in the past have seen the problem. But we now have a new condition of Britain question, and I think we've got to face up to the severity of it. It is far worse than you would have imagined a few years ago. It is far more serious than a lot of people are prepared to admit. And when I look at the figures that we get, the statistics, and also meet some of the children who are affected, what has happened is not only that there are 4.5 million children officially in poverty, there are 2 million children now in the deepest of poverty. And as the Rowntree Foundation has said, there is 1 million children who you might call destitute because they're without some of the basic shelter, food, basic toiletries and hygiene goods, and they have classified them as destitute, or you might say near destitute as a result of the condition that they face. But for 2 million children to be in the deepest of poverty, that's less than 40% of median income, for 2 million children to be in that position, a 50% rise in the last 10 years as a result of a number of policies I'm just going to mention is something that is shameful. It is a scar on the soul of our nation. It's a stain on the conscience of our country. It's obviously the scourge of young lives. And it is a scandal that so little is talked about it in our national media when so much is going wrong for so many families who are hidden from the public eye, and yet their condition is so serious. And so I want to deal with the condition of Britain question as a result of what I welcome as a child poverty review about to report soon. And I think there are three things that have got to be done. One is we've got to be aware of destitution, and we've got to take action to do it. And I know that Alison will speak about homelessness and the fact there's 180,000 children in temporary accommodation at the moment, some of them beyond the legal limit. And she and others want to do something about this very soon. And then you look at the benefit system. And of course, what's happened in the last 15 years is you've had a number of changes. The freezing of benefit, the freezing of child benefit over a number of years, but you've got the 5-week wait, which has caused so many families to get into debt. Half the universal credit claimants' families are paying loans back, and that's something that is being paid at interest rates that have just been reduced but are still very high. You've obviously got the benefit cap, you've got the housing benefit limit, but most of all, as you know, you've got the two-child rule. And it's the two-child rule that is responsible for every year the numbers of children in poverty rising, as 50,000 or more children are born into poverty, and the rest of the family is also in poverty as a result of that, because the money that was available for 2 children is now having to be used for 3 children. And I obviously want to see an end to the two-child limit and the two-child rule. And even a former Conservative minister, Lord Freud, who piloted the bill through the House of Lords that actually introduced the two-child rule, even he was later to say that the two-child rule was vicious and it was excremental. And he said that in a speech in 2023. And without abolishing the two-child rule, the government will not meet its target to have poverty coming down at the end of the Parliament lower than at the beginning. Without abolishing the two-child rule, as I understand it, we will not meet the new target for children under 5, that 75% of children have got to be school-ready by the age of 5. If, as we know, 36% of under 5s are in poverty, then how can you meet a 75% target if you don't take further action, including the removal of the two-child rule? And if we don't remove the two-child rule, we will still have what many people see, and many people have said rightly so, is something that is both ignominious and humiliating, the rape clause, which we should exit from our legislation as soon as possible. And without abolishing the two-child rule, we will probably end up with 2 tapers, a taper which is the benefit cap, and another taper for those people who get less as a 3rd child, less as a 4th child, and so on. So for all these reasons, total abolition is far preferable to any tapering or any other kind of reform that would not abolish the two-child rule in its entirety. But there's another bigger reason why we should abolish the two-child rule. We should not have the stain on the legislative book of the House of Commons and the House of Lords that this prejudice was introduced into legislation more than almost 10 years ago. Because what George Osborne wanted you to believe was that taxpayers were paying money when they couldn't afford to have children for other people to have children who were poor parents on benefit, who were actually having children to get the benefits. That's the prejudice he tried to inculcate into the mind of the country. And as Lord Freud said, that is a vicious, but it's also a fictional account of Britain. 60% of those who are hit by the two-child rule are in families where someone is working. 15% are in single-parent families where the mother cannot work because the child has just been born. Many others are moving between work or in and out of work as a result of their condition. So this account, that this is the benefit change that had to be introduced to deal with the workless, the feckless, the work-shy, and the indolent, is completely wrong, and it should be banished from the statute book of our country as soon as possible, and I hope everybody will agree with them. And I would suggest that the way to do this is to use the gambling levy that we have been proposing, and if necessary, a banking levy to pay for this change. Today is being published a poll that says a majority in every single constituency of this country favour using a gambling levy to pay for the reduction of child poverty. And I hope that the government will listen to that, and if necessary, of course, they could have a levy on the banks. The levy was reduced from 8% to 3% a few years ago, and it could help fund the abolition of the two-child rule, but also all the measures on child poverty. And there's a third thing that is needing to be done, and that is the crisis support system in this country is itself in crisis. It is broken. Because if you look at what has happened over the last few years since the abolition of the social fund, what has happened is when people fall into difficulty in an emergency, an unplanned, an unforeseen happening in their lives, a death in the families, a redundancy, a cancer, a broken family, something that has gone wrong, then the benefit system is not as good at dealing with that as it used to be, but equally at the same time, people have come to rely on local charity, and local charities are under pressure too. So the Household Support Fund, soon to become the Crisis and Resilience Fund, is only $1 billion. It's been frozen at that for a number of years. Local welfare assistance by councils, they cannot afford it because of what has been happening to council budgets. And as you know, there are 2,600 food banks in this country. There were only 35 in 2010. And they are, like all charities that I know, finding it difficult to cope. And that's why I think we need some changes that will also benefit charities. So when you look at local support for families in need, there will always be a need for voluntary organisations and for foundations and charities to play their part with local government and national government. And I do believe we should make some changes in the taxation system to enable it to be possible for charities to flourish, and particularly for anti-poverty charities to get the results that they need in terms of higher giving. You may know that gift aid, which I was involved in introducing, needs changes, because if you pay the top rate of tax, and it's 45%, the 45% doesn't go direct to the charity, and that's got to be changed, and that would raise another £700 million. If you take companies, 3/4 of companies now do not give or do not report giving to charities in this country, and so the amount of percentage of their profits that is going to charitable causes has halved over the last 10 years, from 1.9% of profits to 0.9% of profits, and we could encourage them to do more. Now, I was involved in all these changes, and tax reliefs are very difficult. You know, when we came into government, it was actually a tax relief that the Conservatives had left in power that allowed you to get tax relief for giving people bribes, and we had to change that. We also had a tax relief for films, and you'll be interested, Amal, in this. It all came down to what was the definition of a film. And I think at one point a television channel was wanting Coronation Street to be every edition of Coronation Street to be a new film to get tax relief. And they were thinking of, I think, getting The Weather Forecast as a new British film. And then we had gift aid problems because a lot of concerts were presenting themselves as charities and telling people that their ticket was a donation and then claiming gift aid on it. So there's all sorts of abuses that you've got to deal with. But I do think we need a reform of charities to enable organisations like Child Poverty Action Group, charities across the country doing great work, foundation, to get them more income, to enable them to help good causes. And I do see a national alliance of foundations, charities, and also voluntary organisations with local and national government as the way forward, not just to highlight child poverty, but to do what they can at a local level when the circumstances are very immediate, as food banks and others face, and we could do something about it. I've got to ask myself, as Anne asked at the beginning, why it is that there is so little coverage given to child poverty, and why we need to do more about it, despite all the great actions of all of you here. It's always been a mystery to me why 4 million children are in poverty, but there is more coverage to everything else but child poverty in our country, and why there's a sort of silence in a lot of the media about the conditions of children that are not reported on. You know, Eglantine Jebb said, the only international language people understand is the cry of the child. But it doesn't seem to be that at the moment. Children seen and not heard, we say, but children are often not seen and not heard, invisible, forgotten, particularly the poorest children in our country. And if you look back to when Child Poverty Action Group was formed, and at the same time Shelter was formed, the Disablement Income Group was formed, a lot of great causes formed in the 1960s, because this was a time when, to be honest, I was also growing up. It was the time of the Beatles, it was the time of Vietnam War, the time of student radicalism, it was the time of anti-apartheid movements, and I grew up in that atmosphere. And what was happening then was a revolt against deference, a revolt against hierarchy, a revolt against the establishment. And of course, what happened then was people were emphasizing individual freedom, autonomy, personal liberation. And of course, it was most visibly seen in the way that pop groups were sort of going around the country and creating chaos all over the place at their concerts. and wrecking, smashing up the guitars, wrecking hotels and everything else. And some of you may know the story of the pop groups. They used to book the 7th floor of every hotel when they went round on their tours. It just became a habit. You booked the 7th floor of the Hilton Hotel, and you booked the whole floor. And so the groups would go in, and of course they would cause chaos. And one group arrived in a hotel one week and asked for the 7th floor, and suddenly they were given rooms 601, 602, 603. Said, why have we been given the 6th floor, not the 7th floor? And they said, there is no 7th floor. The Who were here last week. But what happened was that this desire for personal autonomy suddenly, under neoliberal economics, became a rejection of social responsibility, or at least forgetting about social responsibility. And so the balance between individual freedom and social responsibility became skewed. And I think what's happened over the last 50 years is people have emphasized individual freedom and rights at the expense of social responsibility and the need to think of our citizens in our own communities. And this is the balance that is now changing, because I do see a new sense of social responsibility across our country. We have seen in the last few months, churches and faith leaders, I think 40 have just written, saying that something's got to be done about child poverty. We've seen all the anti-poverty groups coming together to do something about it. We've seen the House of Lords, Ruth has kindly organized this with other people, alerting people to the need to do something about child poverty. We had 100 MPs a few days ago saying that something had to be done. And so there is a gradual consensus building up that we've got to take child poverty far more seriously, and I think everybody appreciates that that is absolutely essential. And when I focus on opinion polls, what we're publishing today, as I said, says that by 4 to 1, people want a gambling tax to deal with child poverty. They would say the same roughly if it was other polls say banks should pay something to tackle child poverty. And the other poll that is published in a few days ago said that if the government had not, by the end of its term, seen child poverty reduced, that would be as bad as not seeing waiting lists reduced. And I know the government is rightly committed to achieving both of these aims, and we must help them do so. If you look back at the history of protest and advocacy groups over the last 200 years, whether it's slavery or child labor, or whether it comes to the issues around the women's suffrage or gay rights, or whether it's Me Too movement, or whether it's Black Lives, there are two things that are common to each group. There is an incontestable moral claim that is being made about something that is wrong, and there's an incontestable and almost unanswerable aim that they have to put something right. And if you look at these all these great campaigns, it's a moral claim as well as an economic and social claim that is at the center of them. And when it comes to child poverty, it is the claim that too many children are being denied the chance to have the best possible start in life. And the aim is not just that some children, but every single child has the chance to realize the potential to bridge the gap between what they are and what they have it in themselves to become. And that is what we are trying to achieve. It is not just about some children, it is about every single child in this country having the chance to make the best of their lives, to be able to develop their talents, and to be equipped to do so by being free from the poverty that so many people suffer today. And that must be the moral claim. I just end with one story. In the 19th century, when people started to become aware of the need for social progress and social improvement, Tennyson was the most famous poet of all. And he wrote the great Ulysses, to strive, to seek, to find, and never to yield, a great sort of hymn to optimism about what you can achieve if everybody works together. But then later in life, Tennyson, maybe it was because he became a member of the House of Lords, not in Ruth's case. Maybe he became cynical about the future, and he wrote this poem, which is called Locksley Hall, 40 Years On, and it said, "O chaos, O cosmos, O cosmos, O chaos, where will it all end?" He was so pessimistic about the future. And Gladstone, who was the Prime Minister at the time, wrote this article in the Poetry magazine, 19th century. I mean, which Prime Minister has ever tried to write poetry? Maybe Boris Johnson, I suppose. But he wrote this article, and he said, "You've got it all wrong, Tennyson. You've got it all wrong. Look back on your first poem, which was called Locksley Hall, before Locksley Hall 40 years on." And what that poem was said, dipped into the future as far as the eye could see, and saw a vision of the world and the wonder it could be. And what he was saying was appeal to people's sense that you can have a better future, appeal to people's optimism about the future, appeal to people's hope about the future. And that's what we have got to do. We must become advocates of hope, ambassadors of hope, agents of hope. We must get the message across that it is possible to end child poverty. We are determined to eradicate. We will work harder and harder to do so, and we will not give up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, not at all. I'm very conscious of time. We started about 10 minutes late, so I'm going to try and take about 10 minutes to do this. You, Gordon, got a lot of support in the room for your position, which everyone knows, on the two-child benefit cap. But it is just a fact that the Labour government currently has not changed its view, and the Conservatives are against the change, and only the Reform Party, I'm not sure about the Lib Dems, but only the Reform Party have said that they would scrap it.
And they've changed their mind in the last 3
Have
days.
they?
Yeah.
I just want to put to you, because I think it's worthwhile, I just want to challenge you on that by putting to you the argument that not just George Osborne but others have done, which explains the current position. And it's two arguments. I know you've addressed them, but I want to challenge you on them. The first is that it's unfair, that if you scrap the two-child benefit cap, you would, in effect, be paying some families more money because they had kids, which means families that only had 2 kids would get less from the state in a time of scarce resources. And the second is that we can't afford it. Even if you raise $3 billion from gambling companies, there are other ways of spending that $3 billion.
Well, look, first of all, we're in a consultation period, so all of us should put our views. It's not that the government has come out against abolishing the two-child rule.
No,
the government has not yet made up its mind. The Treasury, as you know, has always been reluctant to consultation exercises. You might know 100 years ago, there was a huge cry from the Ministry of Defence that they wanted to build 6 warships. And the Treasury, as usual, said, we can only afford 4. So the Treasury said, we'll put it out to a public campaign. And then this public campaign happened, we want 8 and we won't wait. And so instead of getting 6 or 4, they actually had to pay for 8. So the Treasury's always been worried, as I found when I was Chancellor, about consultation exercises. But the consultation exercise has been very, very, very clear. You've got to treat children equally and fairly. I mean, the whole point, you don't tell a child who's the 3rd child, you're going to have half the time at school. You don't tell them that the 4th child is going to have a third of the time. You've got to treat children equally and fairly. Now, what Osborne was saying, and I'm sure he said it to the Select Committee when he spoke to it yesterday, he thought it was politically popular because he could peddle what is a lie, that all the people who were getting this benefit for the 3rd or 4th child, all these people were work-shy and feckless and indolent, and they were having children simply to get the benefits. It is simply wrong, and we have got to keep pointing that out. 60% are actually in work of the families who've been denied this benefit. 15% cannot work because the children have just been born. And the rest are moving between, as I said, in and out of work. So the facts don't bear up the allegation. Now, then you're saying, how do you distribute resources in the country? Now, of course, there's a ceiling. I sympathise with the problems that Rachel faces, because a Chancellor cannot meet every objective that has been set by every pressure group, nor can she find money to do all the things she wants to do. But this is a question of priorities and choices. And so if the gambling industry is making excessive profits, and they are excessive profits, and if they're doing a great degree of social harm for problem gamblers, then it is right that just as we tax smoking and just as we tax alcohol, we tax gambling in a fair way. But you know, the rates of taxation for cigarettes are 70%, 80%, for alcohol 70%, and for gambling 21%. In Delaware, the tax on online casino gambling is 57%. In Britain, it's 21%. And so there is a huge gulf between what is a fair rate of taxation and the taxation we're choosing. So I'm saying you make choices as a Chancellor, and surely, as most of the public have said, it is better to tax the gambling industry to pay for action on child poverty than to leave the gambling industry making massive profits and doing a certain amount of social harm in the process. And if you don't get the money from the gambling industry, why don't you get the money from other areas, like the banks had a levy and the levy was reduced and the levy could be increased?
Yeah, and you had a windfall tax on energy companies when you came in. In terms of the choices that a Chancellor faces, When you had a strategy in 1997, very different economic circumstances and environment to that which prevails today. What were the other successful bits of the child poverty reduction strategy? What are, say, the 2 or 3 most effective pillars? For instance, Sure Start, the IFS, people may know here, the IFS did a very remarkably persuasive account of Sure Start, where they said Sure Start was very effective, and if you did it now, there would be a benefit in a short-term investment would yield big-term results.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. Look, in 2010, the Child Poverty Action, the Child Poverty Act was passed to reduce child poverty, and around that architecture was Sure Start, educational maintenance allowances. You had the child trust funds, so you were going to give children the chance to save money through the government supporting that. You had all these measures, including, of course, nursery education and the doubling of educational expenditure. All these things were happening to give people the chance for the children to be brought up in a way that would be useful for the economy as well as good for themselves. Now, the Conservatives and all other parties supported that act in 2010. They all supported it. It went through the House of Commons. And then, after the coalition came into power, they dismantled that act. And that's what has gone wrong in the country, that it's been too easy because perhaps we have not been strong enough in our advocacy for things that are accepted by the political parties one year simply to be abolished by them the next year. And so the child trust funds have gone, educational maintenance allowance have gone. There were 2,600 Sure Start centres. There's so few of them now. They're now being rebuilt as family hubs and so on and so forth. But this whole architecture was destroyed, and therefore there's got to be a consistent public opinion, a national alliance. We've got to come together, 4 nations, all of us, if you like, a movement to protect the reforms that are made, as well as ensuring that reforms are made. And I think what's different in this... See, Joe Biden in America, Joe Biden had a child tax credit. 3 million children were taken out of poverty. And then suddenly the Senate and Congress changed hands, and the child tax credit was taken away, and 3 million people were pushed back into poverty. And there was almost silence in America because there was no consistent national movement that was pressing for action to be done. And that's why I'm saying today we must have that national movement, and it should be in every area of the country. And I see the public opinion ready to support it, but we've got to make it happen.
Your friend and former colleague, Ed Balls, did a very, very comprehensive bit of work, I think last year, on regional inequality in this country. He interviewed you for it. It was a paper for Harvard, and he interviewed John Major and Tony Blair and many, many other people. And he showed that regional inequality in Britain is much worse than comparable nations. We are more tilted towards our capital city. We have fewer second-tier cities.
Exactly.
And if you put his work, which is brilliant, it's all there online, alongside the Index of Multiple Deprivation released last week, you find that there are pockets of very, very intense poverty in this country which are stubborn pockets. So, for instance, of those top 10 most poor places, I think 8 of those top 10 were there in 2019 are still there. A place called Jaywick near Clacton has been very poor for a very long time. 6 out of the top 10 are in and around Blackpool. Why is it that, apart from your point about the media, which I completely accept, it's a disgrace how much this issue is ignored, and I'm trying to do something about it, but why is it that in in the UK uniquely, we have this problem of regional inequality, and we have these pockets that seem completely ignored and where it's very hard to fix poverty?
Well, it's partly the concentration of power in one part of the United Kingdom. I mean, you know, America's got New York as the financial centre, Washington as the political centre, other countries, you know, Bonn and Berlin, Frankfurt. I think the concentration of power in the south has been a problem because some of the areas north have been neglected over a long period of time. So you need a proper regional policy. But you see, I would be more positive about the potential of these areas. If you go around Britain, there are clusters of innovation, of innovative industries, technologies. If you go to Scotland, we've got precision medicine, we've got financial technology, we've got renewable energy. Go to the northeast, much more renewables. If you go to Wales, cyber security. If you go to Manchester, graphene. You've got lots of great new innovative technologies that are developing in our country, a lot of them medical technologies, and that's where we should be investing so that we can actually have growth in every region of the country. So it's an economic question, but it's also, of course, understanding the depths of despair in some of the communities of this country. And I think we have got to draw attention to it so that people will actually change their mind about what needs to be done. It's too easy to look at London, which has its own levels of poverty, and only look at certain parts of London as prosperous, or Oxford and Cambridge and so on, and they've got pockets of poverty as well. So it's too easy to look at some areas of the country and say there is a lot of prosperity here, but we've got to do something about the poorest areas of the country. And I think you've got to be positive, however. You've got to say, look, there is huge potential in this country. If we can actually have children getting the chance to develop their talents to the full, and we've got these innovative technology that we can exploit, then there are jobs for people in the future and a freedom from poverty.
Okay. Final question. One of the most striking statistics which you marshalled and which the CPAG has put out into the public domain is the fact that I think you said 60% of these children are in families where people are working. And the issue is in-work poverty. So this is not about welfare, which is a separate issue, or fecklessness. But one of the prevailing economic trends, pretty much since you left power, is the declining share of national wealth that makes its way to the labour force. This is across many Western democracies. And this is a huge silent economic revolution where work is no longer a route to not just wealth, but being able to support your family. If you were Chancellor today and you look at what's happening where in-work poverty is a problem and you have this long-term trend that work is no longer a route to safety or security, let alone wealth, how do you begin to address that long-term trend?
Yeah, by the way, the figure is 70%.
70, sorry.
70% of children in poverty are in working families. And, you know, when we came into power...
But that suggests that more jobs is not the answer.
When we came into power in 1997, the biggest problem was pensioner poverty, let's be honest, and something had to be done, and a lot has been done about it. Now the biggest problem, and people have not quite realised it in some parts of the country, is child poverty. What do you do about?
Well, the fact that less and less national wealth is making its way to workers,
and that's true right across Europe and right across the world. It's that we don't value certain jobs as we should. I mean, I feel sort of angry because care workers do tremendous jobs. You require something of an extraordinary skill to be a good care worker. It's something that is not valued. And we pay care workers relatively low wages. We as a society have got to value the kind of work that is important to us, because it will become more important as more people are elderly, more people need care, and we don't value people properly. So we've got to have a debate in this country about how we value work itself and the jobs that are valued, because the differentials between the top chief executive and the person who's on the factory floor have grown so much over the last, 10, 15 years, grown incredibly high, and we've got to say, look, a national debate about how you value work and obviously the value we place on extraordinary talents that are not recognised by us at the moment.
I think everyone in this room massively values your input on this. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Gordon Brown.
Thank you.
Gordon, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Gordon. I'm very conscious we're running over, but it was his fault. We are now joined by Alison McGovern, Member of Parliament for Birkenhead and Minister for Local Government and Homelessness, who Gordon mentioned. She's a member of the government's Child Poverty Task Force, which she also attended in her previous role as Minister for Employment. Please welcome Alison.
Good morning, everyone. Amal, thank you for that introduction. I think it's safe to say that when you're a Labour politician, making a speech with Gordon Brown around is a bit like having a kickabout with Kenny Dalglish watching. It's so fantastic to hear Gordon make the case, and I know that we're all really glad that he's here. But the first thing I really want to say is a massive thank you to the Child Poverty Action Group. Thank you for 60 years of hard work. Thank you for 60 years of standing up for the people in our society without votes, too often without a voice, but without whom politics would be utterly pointless. And that is our kids. That's what CPAG does, and I'm so proud to have worked with you through a small proportion of those 60 years. Thank you for all that you have done, particularly to support new ministers coming in and all ministers down the years with all of your insights. Thank you, Amal, for mentioning the indices of multiple deprivation that were published recently. as the minister responsible for them, I was like, and a bit of a stato, I was genuinely sad that that everyone wasn't really taken by the story that they told, because it actually is striking, that pattern of poverty that we're seeing. And in my previous role as employment minister, I went to Blackpool a number of times to talk about better jobs, and the team there gave me a stick of Blackpool rock, which has come with me to my office in MHCLG, because I think too often still families in the poorer parts of this country are getting forgotten. However, they were not forgotten by my colleague Angela Rayner, who I want to thank for being here with us today, and I also want to thank her for nearly 18 months hard graft, and particularly on the homelessness strategy, which we will publish shortly. Angela, much of that will be your work, and I'm so thankful to you. I want to thank my good colleague Meg Hillier, Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, who's also here and fighting a good fight on that committee, and also my former colleagues, Jonathan Ashworth and Anne Keane, who are with us, who've been strong champions for work against child poverty down the years. Going into DWP last year was quite intimidating, but thankfully Liz Kendall and I were able to host an early forum which Child Poverty Action Group assisted us with to get that child poverty strategy work underway, to understand what had been the consequences of quite a few years of drift in this area. Understand what it was about previous action all the way through the 60 years history of CPAG that had actually worked to tackle child poverty. And those insights have been really helpful. And I just want to say a few words about some of the things that I've learnt about this discussion over the past 18 months or so. I have a personal strong connection to CPAG. One of my predecessors, Frank Field, was, of course, one of your predecessors, Alison. And I was fascinated to find out that the first CPAG branch was in my city of Liverpool, and I will be very proud of that. Now, of course, I just want to say before I kind of make my argument that lots of people in the room, especially given the conversation that we've just heard, lots of people in the room will be itching to know what is going to be in the government's child poverty strategy. Well, obviously, I can't say, because it's not yet being published, and I'm not going to preempt any of the details of that this morning. Obviously, you wouldn't expect me to. But I was thrilled to discover, as part of the Child Poverty Action Group history, that Harold Wilson, in 1966, had responded to the first CPAG memorandum on family allowances with the following words. He said, "I can make no promises, as with so many desirable activities, it is of course necessary for priorities to be established within the available resources." And I felt a bit of solidarity there from Harold Wilson through the years. So obviously I can't say what's going to be in the strategy, but I want to make an argument about the purpose of the strategy, and to build on what Gordon said about why we do need, I think, a movement in support of all our kids. In my new role, I have been absolutely horrified to discover the number of our children who are in temporary accommodation, and to know that in the 5 years to 2025, that temporary accommodation contributed to the deaths of 74 of our kids, including 58 who were babies. Now, that is not acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable to anyone in British society, and actually I don't believe that it is acceptable to any of us. So the imperative of a strategy that brings together those four themes, incomes, costs, financial resilience, and good local support, is absolutely uppermost. We need that strategy to look right across government policy and look at every lever we can use to help our children have a better future. But I want to make some comments about the public debate on child poverty, because I wrote previously in the New Statesman, and I believe that the public debate on child poverty has become polarised where we need consensus. And not to rehearse the history again, but I was first elected in 2010 when, as Gordon explained, there had been cross-party support for the Child Poverty Act. But that consensus fell away. And the falling away of that consensus was the context for some of the decisions that we know have driven the rise of child poverty, leading to nearly 1 million more of our kids growing up poor. And for 10 years, the debate has been racked with division. And I think that division puts children who are growing up poor in an absolutely invidious position. At best, they're described as victims in need of charity, looked down upon. Or worse, their families are the villains, a drain on our national resources. Either the victims or the villains. And I think that's wrong. Because children in poverty should be seen as fully rounded humans with agency who deserve to grow up and be able to make choices for themselves. They should be able to decide how to live their own lives. Because we know, and I would credit Ruth Lister's work in this amongst others, and Ruth Patrick at York University, that we know that one of the worst effects of poverty is that it robs you of your agency. And I think that is a profound mistake for any society to curtail the choices and chances and opportunities that the next generation has in life. I want our children to feel like fully rounded humans, able to take risks and make mistakes like anyone else. And not to go too far over the history of all of this, but I am inspired by another Scouser, Eleanor Rathbone. She was quite a well-to-do Scouser. She lived in a very big house in a place called Greenbank in Liverpool. But she was part of a Victorian tradition of friendly visiting, and she'd visited a lot of very, very poor dockers' families in Liverpool. So she had done this research to analyse the condition of those families, and she described the very poor choice set that those poor families in Liverpool at the turn of the last century were constrained by. Today we would call that the poverty trap. But she knew that it was there then. And as a woman who had broken the mould, who had gone to university, who had forged her own path in life, she knew that poor families needed not condescension or condemnation, but more resources through a better job and a system that supported them to take power and control over their own lives. That was the case she made for family allowances, and it's the case that I would make for the child poverty strategy now. Because child poverty keeps families stuck in a frustrating battle with their finances when they should be making progress in life. And I'm seeing that in my new role, working with local government up and down the country on how they see the local support aspect of the strategy, how we can make sure that there's a friendly face and somebody to help offer a cup of tea, give advice on parenting and so on in every local community through Bridget's Best Start in Life programme. And I saw it in my old job working with job centre colleagues who knew that often poor families had two poor choices. So as I said, the strategy to come, and forgive me, you've probably all heard this in this room so many times, but the strategy to come will consider better incomes for families, dealing with some of the costs of poverty, where we know there's a premium to be paid if you're poor. We want poor families to improve their situation through financial resilience, and we published the financial inclusion strategy just this week, and we want to see good local support, as I said. We'll also be publishing very soon a homelessness strategy building on the work of Angela and also my colleague Rashnara Ali, who did an incredible job on that too. We've got the violence against women and girls strategy to come and the food strategy, all of which offer us opportunities to have a coherent, consistent approach to improving family life. But I want to finish on this point. All of this is a fight. Of course it's a political fight. Of course it's a fight against the people who broke the consensus that all our kids matter in this country. But most of all, it's a fight to get those voices heard. It's a fight to recognise that the people who don't have votes in this country are the purpose of our politics. It's a fight to recognise that within each child is an opportunity for them, for us all, to build a better country. And I am asking you us all to help us in that fight. Thank you.
Alison, thank you. We are... Hang on, Ruth, you're not on yet. No. God, you're the typical Ruth list, always trying to get ahead of the curve. We've actually got... I'm conscious we're running 20 minutes over. If you need to leave, please do, but you'd be mad to leave because we've got a choir coming and they're going to be fantastic. Please welcome to the stage the CPAG Chief Executive Alison Garnham and CPAG Policy Director Sarah Ogilvie. You don't want to fall off the back.
Don't fall off the back.
Exactly, a bit like this policy. Alison, if I could start with you, I just want to get straight into it. What are you looking for in the coming budget and in the coming child poverty strategy?
So there are some really... Do I need to press
I think it's all right. Is it working here?
Okay.
Yeah.
There are three things we want. We want a strategy that begins with removing the policies that are driving child poverty up. And that means as a first step, we must get rid of that two-child limit and the benefit cap. There's absolutely no alternative. If they stay, then by the end of this Parliament, we'll have 4.7 million children in poverty rather than 4.5. So the only way that can stop is to do something about it now, to stop that increase. 100 children a day are being pulled into poverty by the two-child limit. We want a cross-government strategy, exactly as Gordon described. We want that again. There are levers across government that we need to pull. I mean, the last strategy had the first Childcare Act ever, Sure Start. We had action on the New Deal for lone parents. We had a minimum wage introduced, but we had tax credits and increases in child benefits. So it understood the importance of social security. Given so many low-income families are working, we are very conscious that wages will not always respond to the size of a family. It doesn't respond to the cost of children. That's why you need child benefit. And that's why you need the social security system. So we need to fix social security, starting with abolition of the two-child limit.
Sorry, when you look over the long 60-year arc of the CPAG and you think about...
Not personally.
Not personally. God, no, not personally. But I know you've studied the history because, it's an important year in the history of this fantastic organisation. We're in a bit of a particularly bad patch, aren't we? If you think that child poverty has been if you look at the arc of progress, obviously with a kind of prevailing economic wind in the 60s and maybe 80s and 90s, things were getting better. We've heard from Gordon about what happened under Labour government. And in a sense, you could put aside politics here, but the fact is we're in a bad moment in that 60-year journey.
We are in a really bad moment. There are a record high number of children living in poverty in 2025 in the UK. That's an absolute disgrace. And in lots of ways, the country has changed in the past 60 years, of course. But frankly, the fact that there are still children who are going hungry, who are living in cold, damp homes, who, despite going to school, still don't have the same opportunities in life that their peers do simply because of their family income. I find that shocking, even though I say that every day. It's the strongest indicator of how well a child will get on at school is their family income. Yeah. How can that be the case? So it's really, really concerning that we have seen this trajectory. And on the one hand, it's depressing, isn't it? It's really depressing. But on the other hand, the good thing about working in child poverty is we know what works. And you said it's not a political point. And in a sense, you're right, because actually we have seen in Scotland, we saw, Gordon's gone now, so I can say this, but actually child poverty started to drop under John Major. Yeah. And we know why. It was when there was investment above inflation in social security support for families. So the answer is clear. Yeah.
So, but everything you're saying there, Sarah, and things that you listed, Alison, including tax credits, Sure Start, social security, I think Gordon mentioned the education maintenance allowance, they all cost money. Yeah. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that this isn't the thing that ought to be top priority. But when you think that you've got to you've got a Labour government, which you didn't have for a long time. You've got the most working class cabinet in history, 100% state educated. You've got lots of people, including former Deputy Prime Minister, who experienced real poverty growing up. And yet we have this record high a year into a Labour government. Do you think that that anomaly is explained not just by how entrenched child poverty is, but by the fact that previously what worked in getting child poverty down was spending money? And when you say to cabinet ministers, we need to spend money, they say there's no money left.
Well, I think we need to put it in context, because over the...
There's always money.
Well,
we spend £1 trillion a year.
But over the 14 years of austerity, 50 billion a year was taken out of benefits for families, whereas for other groups that didn't happen. So we're dealing with a huge loss. And part of that was driven by the fact that benefits were only increased with inflation 5 times in 14 years. So entirely different from the way pensioners were dealt with, for example. So families with children took a massive hit. So we're not saying overnight you've got to put all that money back, but some of it's got to go back, because it's an absolute crisis that we're facing at the moment. Child poverty has risen by 900,000 over that period to 4.5 million, 31% of children. That's a national high. So it's a crisis for the country. We have to do something about it.
And it does cost the country money as well,
Yes.
doesn't it? We're here, as Gordon said, this is a moral issue for the people in this room, but it is also an economic issue, and we know that the cost to the state in terms of public services of children growing up in poverty is, I'm going to get it wrong now, but it's kind of 40 billion a year. And of course, the government can't say, well, if we spend this money now, then we can just take 40 billion out of public services. Nobody's saying that. But if we are looking to long-term growth and renewal, government does need to start investing in things that will make a difference to its expenditure over the long term. OK,
Alison, could you just give the people in this room who are sympathetic to your worldview a bit of political intelligence, basically, on where you think this argument has gotten to? I mean, when you go to the government and they say this, you've got incredibly powerful advocates in this room. You've got a former Prime Minister of this country making the case he made this morning. What's your sense of where this is at?
So there's enormous goodwill. We just heard from Alison McGovern just now.
About a lot of strategies yet to be published.
Yeah, well, yes. But also a great commitment to reducing child poverty. So we know that there are very strong advocates in government for taking the action that we're talking about. But we also know there's a debate going on about whether they can remove, for example, the 2-child limit in full or in part. And so we're pushing really hard, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do the right thing. If it doesn't go now, as I said before, child poverty will be higher when this government leaves office than when it came in. And that can't happen, surely. If you're a government saying you want a child poverty strategy in order to reduce child poverty, then you've got to take action on the main policy that's driving child poverty up now.
Sorry, with your policy hat on, is your sense that some of the things that Bridget Phillipson has done so far, free breakfast clubs being one of them, there's a big curriculum review that was announced yesterday. Is your sense that actually a lot of the energy on child poverty comes from her department, her being someone who's become a cabinet secretary, having experienced poverty as a child herself?
I mean, there is huge drive from the Department for Education to make a real difference to children's lives. And from our perspective, that decision to increase eligibility for free school meals to children in all households and universal credit in England was a really significant move, and we know will make a really big difference to the lives of children who will not be sitting hungry in their classrooms. A little push would be we would want it to be universal, but it's a really good start and good progress. And there's loads going on in education. We do lots of work in schools and we really support it. But again, all the evidence does show that schools can't do this on their own. Teachers are buckling under the pressure of having to deal with social problems, with poverty and the fallout of that. And school budgets are already under huge pressure, and they're having to spend money on how they can help deal with a problem not at source. So there's huge drive from the DFE, but DFE alone can't come up with the solutions on this. Yeah. And, Alison has spoken about the 2-child limit, and I'm going to speak about it because I'm probably the most obsessed person with the 2-child limit in the country. But what we haven't said is that it's the most cost-effective way to reduce child poverty as well. So bringing together all your questions, what do we want government to do? What is the best way for them to spend money if things are tight? It is to scrap the 2-child limit. And pound for pound, for every single child that is affected by the 2-child limit, it is the most cost-effective way to lift them out.
Can you explain
this? If you go for a compromise... Yeah. The reason that it's most cost-effective is because introducing it was highly targeted at children in poverty and children and families. It was a deliberate decision to affect those groups of people back during the early austerity period. So the counterpoint to that is if you get rid of it, then what it does is you're spending money directly on children, families, the majority of whom are going to be living in poverty. So you're going to make that really big difference to them. And the cost effectiveness is, it's really key to the argument to abolish it in whole as well, because government could do, it could lift 100,000 kids out of poverty. It could lift 200,000 kids out of poverty. There's lots of different variations on a child limit that they could do. But anything less than fully scrapping it, they will be throwing away the opportunity to do the most cost-effective way to lift kids out of poverty. That will leave some of those children far behind. When is government going to come back and get them, if not now? But also, if you're not going to lift them out of poverty in effectively the cheapest way that you can, that doesn't make sense.
You end up paying the money, in other words, through other departments. What's your sense, beyond that particular one policy, which I hear your position on it, beyond that policy, what's your sense of why child poverty has increased, Sarah?
So it's the social security system. As Alison says, we haven't really gone into this in too much detail, but if you have children, and lots of us have children, or nieces or nephews or were children, you know that they cost money, right?
Hell yeah.
Know that they cost money. You know that they cost money. And you want to buy them things, and they need food, and they need heating. That's all totally reasonable. So you have children, and your costs will go up. If you have a job, your salary's not going to change to reflect how many kids you have. If you've got to look after them, if you've got caring responsibilities, if, like most parents or aunties or uncles, you want to spend time with them, you might not be able to work full-time. Your flexibility might be limited. So these factors around the inherent nature of family life mean that in addition to lots of improvements in the job market that government can and should make, you are always going to need a social security system to pick up some of those pieces if you value children, if you recognise that it's an inevitable but time-limited period of people's lives. That is a social, good thing for government to do.
As a final question to you, Gordon's good, isn't he? He's quite useful too. Just tell us a little bit about that relationship. Did he come to you or did you go to him? He's obviously got...
We've been in contact with Gordon over a long period of time. He helps whenever he can. He's an inspirational figure for us because the last Labour child poverty strategy lifted 1 million children out of poverty. It was enormously successful. We learned that child poverty responds to policy and that we know how to do it in this country.
Do we know how to do
it? We can do it again.
Do we know how to do it in a time of no money?
We can
albeit we spend $1 trillion years.
We can make a start, and I think that's what we're saying, is you have to at least make a start with getting rid of the policies that are driving the rates of child poverty up. Because what that does is to steal away those children's life chances. Low income, as Sarah just said, is causally related to poor health outcomes, poor education outcomes, poor levels of self-esteem and mental health amongst children and young people. We can't have that. We can't have this tsunami of problems heading towards the health service and that schools are having to deal with at a time when we're still a very rich country.
We are.
It's not acceptable.
And we spend $1 trillion a year.
Yeah.
Okay, Sarah, Alison, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you so much. That was terrific. Thank you so much. There you go. Right. Okay, so next up, we're bringing together CPAG past, present and future with Baroness Ruth Lister, who's not only one of CPAG's earliest employees, went on to become its director, but is currently the honorary president, but also the real star of this morning, Riyadh, who is a member of CPAG's youth panel. Please welcome them. Good to see you, man. You all right?
Thank you, Amal. The other day, someone said to me they were looking forward to seeing the ghosts of CPAG past. I'm probably one of the longest-standing ghosts, having worked for the group in the 1970s and the 1980s when poverty soared. But I think it's appropriate that I'm introducing today part of CPAG's future. Riyadh, who is a member of the CPAG's youth panel. So I'm going to ask him a few questions. The first one being, can you tell us what the youth panel is, Riyadh?
So thanks, Ruth, and hi, everyone. My name is Riyadh, and I've been part of the CPAG youth panel since last summer. And the CPAG youth panel is a group of young people from across London who come together to explore and understand the problems that young people may be facing related to poverty. We share our experiences and raise awareness, and push for change in communities and with policymakers. It's all about making sure young people's voices are heard, and when decisions are made that affect our lives, we have a voice. And joining the CPAG Youth Panel lets me use my voice to push for a fairer future and make a meaningful difference.
Thank you. And why is it so important that we hear from children and young people in policy making?
Youth voice is so important because no one understands the problems that young people may be facing and their impacts on young people better than us. And adults can guess what we need, but they don't live by it every day.
Right.
When young people are listened to, the solutions that come out are more real, more practical, and more fairer. And it's also about rights. Every young person has rights and deserves to have a say in shaping the systems that they live by every day.
And finally, what do you hope the future looks like for children and young people?
For the future, I want to live in a country where poverty doesn't decide what young people can and can't do, where no one misses out on school trips, activities, or even having enough money for lunch. I want communities to treat young people and children with respect, to involve us in decisions, and to work alongside young people, not just for us. A fair future is one where every child and young person has an equal chance to take part, an equal chance to belong and to thrive. I believe this is possible, but it requires bold action and urgency for those in power. Childhood is short and young people cannot wait.
Thank you, Riyadh. Can I just say, I wish that there were cabinet ministers here in the room to hear what you had to say, because A, what you said was so important, and B, it really reflects what's been said earlier about the importance of listening to the voices of children and young people. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well done, Riyadh. Cheers, mate. Nice one, man. Well done. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you so much. Right. He's coming for my job. Right, now we've got a sing-along. I think it's a sing-along. This is the pupils from Ark Atwood Primary School here in London. The pupils, staff and parents of the school have worked with the CPAG team over the last year on ways to make sure school life is accessible and equitable for all children. Oh, they're coming in 2 minutes.
Blame the children.
Blame the children. Blame the children. That's not a good motto for CPAG. Okay. This is excellent. This is where we need to fill, don't we? I could just pick on people that I know in the audience, of which there are a few, and ask them to respond to what they've heard today. And I think I might do that. Or would we rather hear from Riyadh? I don't know. Bit of Riyadh. Okay. Riyadh, what's the... tell me a bit about your future, man. Where are you studying right now?
Right now I took a gap year, so now I'm just trying to, explore my options, and there's a lot of things. You just call me on the spot here.
That's all good. What are you thinking about doing next? Have you got a place at uni, or are you going to go to work, or what?
Reapplying, but as you've heard before, there's a lot of problems that young people are facing, especially in terms of jobs. For example, work experience placements, shadowing. There's not a lot of opportunities for young people, and this has been a problem not only for me but a lot of my peers as well. And as we heard earlier, you were saying that attainment is related to the family's
income, yeah.
Right? And I've seen that myself. Going to a state school, but however, seeing there's a lot of disparity between incomes and
even within the school.
Yeah, even within the school.
But can I just ask? You mentioned that your friends are facing a lot of the similar problems. Do you mean as you leave school at the age of 18 or so, it's hard to get a job, or it's hard to work out what you want to do next? What are the problems you and your mates are facing?
I just say in terms of opportunities, just where you go on post-18.
Yeah.
For example, we can see the government is trying to introduce V-levels and such, but I don't think it truly addresses the problem of once you go post-16 or post-18, what are the next steps? So, I know what I want to do, but there's many young people who are quite unsure, and there's no system in place to help make sure what they want to do next.
What do you want to be doing in 10 years' time?
Me.
Job interview.
I want to take a route into university and study medicine. So I'm reapplying this year, and that's my plan.
Wicked, he's going to do it, isn't he? Mate. Nice one, man. Oh, mic drop. You have to have a mic drop, yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome